sometimes, I mean, anybody can get down sometimes. And it never fails that I feel better after I'm here than when I got here. Whether it's the singing, or the prayers, or just being with people, it makes me feel better. And I'm thanking you for that. I appreciate it. In class this morning, we were talking about us, particularly children, that sometimes there is a long-term effect, and that we may address it for a while, and then we may let it go. And I know that there may be other things the same way. Particularly someone loses someone they love, and right away everybody's around them, and that's good. But then we go on with our lives, and sometimes we forget to continue to care. And we want to remember to do that as a family. As we are a family, we want to remember those that may not be here today for whatever reason. So we want to continue to care and to make sure that we reach out to them over a period of time, not just right away. That was a good statement. It's just a joke, but I thought it was funny. So there you go. No religious connection here, just a joke. There were these two guys, and they're construction workers. And it's St. Patrick's Day, and one of them says, we need to take today off. And they said, how are we going to do that? I said, well, I'm going to act crazy, and they're not going to let me go up on those high beams if I'm acting crazy. So he crawls up there, and he's hanging from this highest beam in this big construction contract and says, look at me, I'm a light bulb. And the foreman says, get down from there. What's wrong with you? Go home. If you're going to act like that, we can't have you up here. So he got the day off. And his other friend starts putting up his tools. He just put them up. The foreman says to him, what's wrong with you? Why are you putting up your tools? He says, I can't work in the dark. That's what sometimes I feel. I can't work in the dark. Well, we've been looking at Philippians. As we've seen that we've looked at life, live a life of joy. We talked about that we want to have prayer in our life all the time, invoke prayer. That we want to make sure that we are living the gospel. Gospel living, not just what we hear, but the way we live. To have the mind of Christ, who gave up his life in heaven to come down here to be with us. That he came to earth and dwelled among us. And then think on these things. Now, we looked last week at how Paul is encouraging us not to dwell on the bad stuff, but to think on these things, whatever is beautiful, whatever is true, whatever is honorable. Think on these things. Now, we're going to stay in Philippians this week, but we are going to, we'll move on. Tony's going to be here next week, and then after that, we'll be moving on from Philippians to something else. I don't know exactly what. But my question to you today, in order to live an innocent and blameless life, what would be on your list of characteristics? If you went to the Barnes & Noble and you go over there in the self-help section, and there's a title, Live Innocent and Blameless. And so you go in there, what would you expect to find in that book? Of all the things they want you to do, to live a blameless and innocent life. And sometimes these are just some of the things I can. You may come up with a different list, but don't do murder, don't steal, don't lie, no sexual improprieties, attend church regularly, give to the church all you can. And those are good rules. Those are good things to do in your life. You know, we don't want to have murderers, and we don't want to have bad things going on in our life. We want to be here with one another because we get strength from one another. We want to make sure that we take care of one another. But I was looking, as we read Philippians, as we look at it, to lead that innocent and blameless life. Let's look what Paul has to say. Oh, this is it's a song. Why would you want to lead a blameless life? Why? And the psalmist says, O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart. If we want to live on God's holy hill and dwell in his house, to live blamelessly is one of the things we want to do. And as we look at blameless and innocent, I don't want to say that this is everything there is. I'm just saying this is one of the things that Paul tells us. But obviously, living blamelessly is important. I also want to emphasize that blameless does not mean sinless. And blameless does not mean perfect, because we're not going to get there. But blameless also can sometimes be translated, particularly the Greek word that would translate to blameless, as complete. Is that we have a complete life, that we have the good life, that we have the abundant life with Christ. To live blamelessly is to live with Christ. But Paul tells us here in 2:14, Philippians 2:14, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. In order to be blameless, do all things without grumbling or disputing. And I got to tell you, when I was making my list and thinking about what would make you blameless and innocent, not grumbling wasn't on my list. Not disputing wasn't on my list. And yet here we have Paul telling us, in order to live blamelessly, let there be no grumbling or disputing. Now, many times I think we think of, we were talking about this morning, Rand was talking about it, that we tend to rank sins. That this is a bad, really bad one, and this one, this is not so bad. Usually, we rank them sometimes of which ones are really bad or the ones you're doing. Ones that aren't so bad, those are the ones I'm doing. But we tend to rank sins. And these are not ones that we usually talk about much. Grumbling or disputing. Some translations might say without complaining or arguing. And I want to tell y'all something. These are things that I have problems with. I grumble. If I watch a basketball game, Blackie, sometimes the referees don't agree with me all the time. That's because sometimes they're wrong, Kelly. Old stories. Grumbling and disputing. I have a problem with that. And I confess it, and I want to do better. Is that arguing is something I like to do. And I'm not saying I necessarily like to complain, but I certainly do it. I grumble. I complain. And it is a problem. And Paul is telling us, if you want to be a blameless and innocent person, don't grumble. Don't complain. This is not an unusual thing in the Bible. If you look in Proverbs, it's going to tell you that those who bring strife between friends with a word, there's a problem there. If we look in the book of James, we're going to see, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Slow to speak, slow to grumble, slow to dispute, slow to have anger. Those are things that make such a difference in our lives when we do that. That sometimes we think that, oh, that doesn't affect me. That's not going to matter. But it does. And particularly I want to look at this. Particularly I want to look at this as within a family. And I know that maybe I'm harping on this congregation being a family a lot. But I believe it to be. And it's something that gives me strength. It gives me strength when you show up. It gives me strength. And I'm not, sometimes I tease you. And I do. But I'm not teasing you now. Is that when we're here together, we give one another strength. And that applies to all of us. And I got to tell you, we don't have a lot of grumbling and disputing. I'm not trying to say that we do. I'm talking more about myself when I was looking at this position, this topic for support, is grumbling and disputing. That we see here, if we take time to slow down a little bit, that maybe we won't be so quick to say something sharp, that we won't say something in anger as we look at this. One of the other things that Paul is talking about is he says that in this, we're going to go back. I'm sorry, I got to go back a little. That we are in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. That's what Paul said. That was there, 2,000 years ago, he was saying a crooked and twisted generation. If we look around at our world today, I think we would all say that we are in a crooked and twisted generation, just as Paul did. And that's not a new concept. Because you see, the thing about it is Paul is quoting Moses here from, 1,000 years before Paul. As we look at this, it says this is Moses in Deuteronomy 32:5. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children because they are blemished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. So we see this over and over and over. We see it here, in the time of Moses, which, depending on who you listen to, could be 1200, 1400 BC, somewhere in there. You look at Paul telling it to the people in Philippi, a twisted and crooked generation. And we look at our world today, a crooked and twisted generation. That hasn't changed. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think that there have been many things that are better now than they were at the time of Moses or at the time of Paul that have gone better. There are also some things in our generation that are not good, that we have a problem with, and they are still crooked and twisted, and that applies to all of us. As we look at that, as we look at what Paul tells us, what does he tell us to do? I'm going back and forth here. Among whom you shine as lights in the world. What is Paul telling the people at Philippi to be doing? To shine as lights in the world. And I think when we look at ourselves, what is he telling us to do? To shine as lights in the world. That Paul is giving us an opportunity, he's giving the people in Philippi, that Christ gives us this opportunity to participate in God's plan on earth. Not only is it a privilege to participate in that, it is what is our mission on earth. Is that we know, and I want to emphasize this. It's not our mission, it is God's mission. And sometimes I say our mission, or my mission, or our ministry, or our church. This is God's church. And let's never forget that. It is God's mission and God's ministry, and we participate in it. It's not ours. Ever. That we don't want to ever get the idea that this is us. It is God. It is Christ. And we have that mission. Paul also tells us that God gives us the ministry of reconciliation, of reconciling the world to God. That is our mission. It's been given to us. And one way we do that is without grumbling or disputing or complaining, so that we may shine as lights in the world. That we are here, and again I want to emphasize that sometimes Paul talks to individuals, but usually what he talks about is as a body. That he's talking to the church at Philippi, talking to the church here in Headley, as a body, that we are to shine as lights in the world. And one of the ways we do that, it goes right back to there, to be blameless and innocent, without grumbling or disputing. Now, we always say that we want to be a good example in the world. And yes, we do. And I've always had a hard problem with that. As I've always looked at that, is I don't want to do something wrong and that the world will see it. And they'll cast aspersions on God or the church or our family, whatever it may be. And that's right. We don't want to do something that will cause people to think less of us as a church. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. Paul is talking about do something as an example to the world to make a difference in the world. That we want people looking at us. We talked last week about that all-seeing eye. And we have it in the world. We all know people are watching. People are watching us today. And we want that, so that we can shine as lights in the world. That we can make a difference in our world. It's not just not doing that list. When we go through that list of don't murder, don't lie, go to church. We do go to church and don't make mistakes. Is that we want to show the world what it means to live as lights in the world. And one way we do that is without grumbling or disputing or complaining. And I have a problem with that. And I want to do better. And I am asking that for help in that. And we want to do that together. That we want to be an example for the world in a twisted and crooked generation. Now, I got to tell you, we've looked at this, and 2,000 years ago, Paul was right saying this. We look 1,000 years before that, Moses was saying crooked and twisted generation. 1,000 years from now, if we're still going on, they'll probably still call themselves a crooked and twisted generation. They may be. But today, in our world today, do we make a difference? Do we take care of one another? Do we make a difference in the world today? Do we participate in God's mission here on earth? Now, one of the things we say, and this is something that Tony said, how we behave matters, because within human society, everything is contagious. Sadness and anger, yes, but also patience and generosity, which means we all have more influence than we realize. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that so often we get the idea that our bad behavior is contagious, and it may be. I'm not doubting that at all. But let's remember that our good behavior also can be contagious. That the good example can make a difference in our world. That we can make us a little less crooked and a little less twisted. And this is, it is St. Patrick. Oh, yeah. This is what we were looking at earlier. Live a life of joy. Invoke prayer. Gospel living. Have the mind of Christ and think on these things. As we look at those ideas, if you look at the first letter of each of those, it's going to spell L-I-G-H-T, light. And if we do live that way, a life of joy, if we always have prayer in our life, live according to the gospel, have the mind of Christ, and think on those positive things, we will be lights in the world, as Paul tells us to be. To be lights, to participate. It's not a matter that we get to sit on the sidelines and watch. We just don't. But we have to participate in God's mission here on earth. Now, this is another quote. This is from Patrick, the guy that's attributed to taking the first time taking Christ's message to Ireland, commonly called St. Patrick. And we had St. Patrick's Day on Friday. And this is one of his prayers. As I arise today, may the strength of God pilot me, the power of God uphold me, and the wisdom of God guide me. And I think that is as we go forth today, as we look at what we're going to live this week, as we get up each day, let's make sure that we have the strength of God in our lives, the power of God to go forward, and the wisdom of God to guide me. Each of those are from God. So often, I'm confessing another thing, is that I want to rely on my own self. And God tells us it is God working within us that makes a difference, not the other way around. God working within us, that we're going to be able to participate and make a difference. As we go forward, let's remember, just like the guy hanging from the rafters that was going to be a light bulb, we are light bulbs. And we want to shine into the darkness. Doesn't mean that we're trying to get people off work, but we are trying to be a light to shine into the darkness. And let's remember that it is God that does it, not us. And it is God working within each of us individually, and God working within us as a family, as a congregation that makes a difference. But that is why we are here. We are here to make a difference. And we want to first make a difference in our lives here. And then we want to work our way out. But if somebody needs something here today, we want to respond to that. We want to be here for you. And if someone needs to put on Christ, to bring Christ into your life, inside you, we want to help you with that also. So if you do have a need of any kind, if you would come while we stand and as we sing.